Navigation. What's your number one piece of advice to people for navigating, especially in the complex lakes and to some extent rivers of the Canadian North? Not the George
Well,
River, which you said was a straight run.
yeah, definitely. It's a huge asset if you can learn to navigate intuitively, doing things the old-fashioned way that humans have done for thousands of years everywhere humans have ever lived, which is just reading the landscape and using the sun. Uh, this might sound incredibly daunting, like, oh, but it would take a lifetime to acquire such skills. But in reality, it's actually relatively straightforward and something that I think almost anyone could master. And you can get decent at it in relatively short amount of time, weeks or maybe a month, just to get the rudimentary aspect down. But I think the more you can navigate intuitively, just looking at the rivers and getting a real sense of reading them, right? Like you've studied the map before you left home.
Yeah.
And now that mental image of the map in your mind, you're able to transfer it seamlessly to what you're actually looking at. So you don't have to consult it every 10 minutes. That is a huge asset. And it can make not only your paddling much more enjoyable because you don't have to constantly fiddle with a GPS or a map. It allows you to cover a vastly greater distance than someone who has to constantly wait for a GPS to power up, especially out there, right, where there's no cell towers. GPS isn't instantaneous. It takes a while to turn on, to connect to a satellite and bring up a map. And of course, the other problem is, well, you often have glare from the sun, just making it hard to see the screen. You have to take your polarized sunglasses off and the waves are knocking you around. And then the actual screen is really small. So you're left with either you got to zoom in all the way to get to the sense of where you are, but now you can't see your surroundings, this big 30-kilometer lake that you're on. So then you try to zoom out, but then you can't really tell where you are. So I think that learning to navigate the way that humans have for countless generations is something that's not only a lot of fun, but it's intensely practical. It will help you in countless ways on any sort of canoe trip or journey. And you do that just by spending more and more time out in nature, navigating in the woods. It can be a challenge. I mean, I was lucky. I got to grow up with a forest all around my house, and the forest had no trails. It was just a wild forest, right? And I just took it for granted that every day I was in the woods with my brother and my dog, and we just wandered at will. And we got really good at memorizing things in the woods. That particular sassafras, that particular oak.
Yeah. And you made it home. You made it home eventually.
Yes. And then just naturally it evolves from that. Every canoe trip you do, you get very used to memorizing the landscape. So you always remember where you've come from. And it just happens very easily, right? And I think anyone can master that without too much trouble. And it will help you a lot when you're navigating. And again, it's not...
Sorry, that natural navigation also helps provide sort of a second opinion, because maps can be incorrect, GPS can be incorrect.
Yep. Yeah, that my GPS was wrong a few times in Labrador just because landscapes change. Actually, beavers change it.
Yeah.
It was showing a water course connecting these lakes. And I'm not talking like a little beaver creek. It was showing it was all part of a lake, but the lake no longer existed. Decades ago, it must have been, the beavers had built dams, and over time, dams can become solid. And these dams had trees, tamaracks and spruce and willows and alders that had grown on them, and rocks had accumulated, and then sediment had accumulated. So the landscape was just nothing like the GPS. It had become completely different over time. Now, I'm saying, I don't want to say that you shouldn't use a GPS. Of course you should use a GPS. I use a GPS. I carry them on my expeditions, and I carry topographic maps and compass. You should use all of them. It's kind of like the natural navigating intuitively works hand in glove with the GPS, because now you don't need to check your GPS as often, right? If you didn't have any sort of natural navigation ability, then you would have to check your GPS like every half hour, maybe even more frequently if you're portaging or something. But if you're comfortable, bushwhacking for 2 kilometers and you're sure that you're not going around in circles, that you're keeping an even course, wow, your portage just got a lot easier than, especially with storms of black flies around you, checking your GPS to make sure you're going the right way. And in some ways, if you become dependent on the GPS, it's going to make your task infinitely harder, because now it's like you've got to follow this screen to find, where I left my backpack, because I've got to get my next load for this portage. But the forest, there's no trails. and you're going to constantly stumble over boulders, over deadfall, falling down trees, all sorts of hummocks and other natural objects or obstacles. So it actually makes it a lot harder relying on something like that. So I would say that in terms of navigating, learning to do a little bit the old-fashioned way can go a long way to making things easier and more enjoyable.
Yeah, I would completely agree. And at the same time, the GPS has been a lifesaver on portages when a forest fire has gone through and a whole bunch of jack pine has come up and it's all 15 feet high for as far as the eye can see, and it's super dense. Like, there's no, you can tell which direction is north, which direction is south from the sun, and that's about it. So using the GPS in a situation like that is a godsend. Otherwise it would totally change the way that you portage. You would have to do it in like jumps of 50 feet or 100 feet because you will lose your backpack in that unending sea of essentially homogeneity.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's but your GPSs fail, batteries run out, screens get cracked, and if that's the only way you have of navigating, you can really screw yourself hard that way too.
Yep. And just it'll take you so much longer to navigate through lakes and things if you need your GPS to do it for you. But my whole advice is that you use both, right? That I'm saying the GPS and the old-fashioned way, hand in hand, combine them, and you have the best of all possible worlds.
Something that's not really possible for you or for any longer trip is if you, like the screen display on most GPSs sucks, but if you link it to your phone, the display of the GPS on the phone is usually a lot better. However, now you're burning your batteries on your GPS much faster because it has to talk to your phone. You're burning batteries on your phone much faster because it has to be talking to your GPS. So it's not really sustainable for, on the scale of a week trip or a 2-week trip or a 3-month trip at all.
No, yeah, that would be a challenge.